And these days, because of independent media like you and I, the life expectancy of government lies can be clocked with an egg timer. And the phony dead Osama pictures and the bogus Flight 17 image are a good example of that. These things had barely made the corporate media when they were already being trashed all over the internet.
So in a world where people may be presented constantly with sort of PR stories or propaganda stories, in fact, I heard at a recent visit to a university with a journalism program that more and more often no corporations are allowing people to speak to the outside public that aren't in their corporate communications or public relations department, and that also read an article that corporations are starting to stockpile public relations artifacts and stories and that sort of thing, so that when something unfavorable comes out against the corporation, whether it's about quality or safety or whatever business practices, they can immediately launch a campaign to put out this pre-prepared stories to distract and redirect, deflect public attention. So this is just becoming standard.
Well, it's called perception management. The slang inside term is spin doctoring. And it really is all about image. We've seen certainly Monsanto putting out tremendous amounts of advertising and corporate image spots trying to counter the rising concerns over genetically modified food. And it really is a very real-life equivalent to The Matrix. And I think one of the reasons The Matrix movies did so well is that at some level the audience understood it really was a metaphor for the lives that we lead, where we look at our TV screens and our newspapers and we listen on the radio and we think we're getting a window into the world, and no, we are not. We are, in fact, surrounded by this carefully crafted illusion that we are presuming to be real. And people are now waking up and realizing that no, it isn't, and together with the economy, it's one of the reasons why cable TV companies are losing customers. And people are turning away from the traditional corporate media, and the independent media online now has the lion's share of the audience. Corporate media doesn't want to admit that. They're trying to figure out some way to reverse that trend. But there's really a major transition going on here. And if you want a historical precedent, go back and study the history of the period where Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. Because he made books affordable to the middle class. They were no longer these treasured objects of the ultra-rich that were hand-copied by monks. Literacy exploded. People started reading. They started asking questions. And it was a real threat to the to the power structure of the day. Now, those institutions that could evolve to meet the new environment of a better educated population are still with us. Those entities that could not evolve and adapt went extinct. And we're going through pretty much the same phenomenon here right now. And if you look at some of the extreme measures that were attempted to try and get the availability of books and literacy back under control, you see a lot of their echoes in the current age, where they're trying to get the internet under control. They're trying to say, oh, the government must control the internet to control child porn. We have to control the internet to bring back net neutrality, which they took away in the first place. And they're really very desperate to try and take America back to the golden age of the Cold War of the 1950s and 1960s, where all communication through society it starts with the government, goes to the corporate media, goes to the people, and that's it. And they're really not able to deal with a population able to communicate with each other on a vast scale.
So some of the remaining threats that emerge from that are threats to privacy, which certainly has been denied and discounted. Could you address that one?
Well, there's absolutely no question that the government is ignoring the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution with all of this NSA spying. They're also ignoring the Fifth Amendment, which underneath the part about self-incrimination, it says the government can't use your property without compensating you. And all of this spy technology is built into your computer, your internet bandwidth, your cell phone, your tablet, and the government is just using it to keep watch on you without paying you just compensation. So they're really off the constitutional foundation at this point. Now, here is where it gets really, really interesting, because as you're probably aware, the Senate failed to pass the USA Freedom Act, which was going to try and get some of this NSA spying under control. The reality is that real criminals and real terrorists can still evade the NSA. Over at my website, over the last year, we issued 6 NSA challenges. These were messages encoded in codes that I just created out of my own head and wrote the software to, and I put them out there for a challenge, and not one of them ever got broken. And I'm not an encryption expert. I'm only a moderately decent programmer, but I was still able to come up with these codes that nobody could break. And what this tells us is that the real criminals and the real terrorists are invisible to the National Security Agency. That's why they're never able to find all these people who are breaking into these retail store operations to steal credit cards. They haven't identified any real terrorists. What the NSA is doing to the United States of America is essentially what the Gestapo was doing to Nazi Germany. They're just sending out the message, we are watching everything that you do. The NSA is not in existence to look out for crime and terror. The NSA exists to watch you closely and let you know you're being watched, to keep you from speaking out about what's going on with the government. And, of course, along the way, they've been caught stealing business secrets from businessmen to give to their cronies. They've been stealing pictures of wives and daughters in states of undress to enjoy with each other. I've lost count of the number of these people who have already been brought up on insider trading charges based on information they glean from laptops owned by businessmen. It's just open season on the American public, and the attitude on display is that the U.S. government now sees you, your information, your wealth, whatever, as their personal property to do with as they will, and that, of course, is the hallmark of a dictatorship.
Yeah, if you could press farther into that direction of property, you mentioned a few examples of it, such as your information services that you're paying for, or I guess we'll get to finances a little bit later, but are there any other examples of personal property, real estate, et cetera, that you see as being under threat, even though that may be a veiled threat still at this point?
Well, it's not a veiled threat here because there is a runaway epidemic in this country of what is called civil asset forfeiture. And this is just police departments across the country who are going on out, and they'll find something. They'll pull somebody over for a broken taillight, and if they're carrying $2,000 or $3,000, the police officer just says, I think that this money was intended for a drug buy, and they will confiscate it right there. And because they're not arresting the actual person, your normal presumption of innocence does not come into play. It's a return to the Napoleonic Code. And it is very difficult and expensive for people to try and go to court and get their property back, because they have to go into court and prove that the money was legally theirs through honest endeavor and that they did not intend any ill with it. And most police departments have now gotten into the practice. They'll stop you, they'll take $5,000 from you, and they'll say, look, we'll give you $2,500 of it back if you won't sue us for the remainder. And a lot of people are going for it. Our new nominee for Attorney General, when she was the U.S. Attorney in New York, oversaw close to $1 billion in civil forfeiture. And it's just another reminder, our federal government, our state governments are absolutely flat broke. They've been driven into poverty by that private central bank along with the ordinary American people. And we have now entered a time when pillaging the citizenry is now official policy all across the country. On Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, a couple of weeks ago, they did a segment on civil forfeiture that's absolutely hilarious. And you need to look at it because they just lay it right out. This is just the police departments of the country running around and seizing property without arresting anybody for a crime and just saying, okay, this is ours now.
Now, in the area of dependency on government, we've made a huge migration from a fiercely independent colonies that where people were principally farmers. They could provide for themselves, raise their own food, etc. They didn't want to be dependent on England. They wanted freedom from tyranny, and they wanted to be independent. And we've just seen a huge spike in the last decade, especially of number of people dependent on food stamps, number of people dependent on government payments of one kind or another. Could you address the loss of independence and the trend towards dependency on government?
Well, you're absolutely right, and this is intentional on the part of the government. They're trying to get everybody in America dependent on the government for something, because that dependency is the enslavement mechanism. And they're openly, even as they're cutting food stamp payments, they're openly advertising for more people to go on food stamps. They want you dependent on big corporations for your food. They want you dependent on big corporations for pretty much everything, and they're going out and actively trying to shut down anybody who's trying to be independent. We're seeing the USDA is going after small organic farmers because they will not comply with certain regulations that only large corporations are able to do with. We know the FDA has launched a campaign against people who are selling colloidal silver as an antibacterial, even though its efficacy is that it goes all the way back to the Black Plague of Europe. They realized it worked. And it's all about protecting corporate profits. Monsanto is literally trying to bring the entire world into dependency on their corporation for the seeds with which to grow their food next year. And it is definitely by design, because when you're dependent on the government, you are the slave to the government. And you're absolutely right. The American Revolution was fought because the colonists did not want to be forced to be dependent on the Bank of England for their currency. They didn't want to be forced to buy all their goods from the British East India Company, and that's why July 4th is called Independence Day. It's not called Freedom Day. It's not called We Kick the British Out Day. It's Independence Day, the day that we were no longer forced to be dependent on certain vested interests for the necessities of life.